Esta conferencia comenzará a grabarse.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the virtual dialogue Earth Charter and Climate Change, the Planet in Flames, are organized from Earth Charter Young Leaders in commemoration for the 20th anniversary Earth Charter, Earth Day, and in memory of victims and animals that died in bushfires in the Commonwealth of Australia. I present to you my colleagues from the Earth Charter Young Leaders, Julian Arias from Costa Rica, Karen Proa from Mexico, and Rocio Collantes from Panama. Karen, are you here?
Well, good evening there. Well, good morning there, I guess. But evening here in Costa Rica, where I live. Well, as Rocio said, I am Karen Proa, and well, I am Mexican, but now I am in Costa Rica, living here and working as well. So I am an Air Charter Young Leader, and I have been working with Air Charter around 4 years, facilitating conferences and workshops about sustainable development. And now I am working at Ecology Project International, Costa Rica, as an environmental educator. So I have like several years of experience here with sustainable development and with Air Charter as well. So I'm pretty happy that you are here and to have the opportunity to share about this important topic today. And I hope that you enjoy and learn a lot from this presentation and this dialogue. So thanks, Dr. Darcy, as well, for your presentation and share your knowledge with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen, for introduction and explain a little about two Earth Charter Young Leaders. The Earth Charter Young Leaders program aims to help young people become ethical and effective leaders in the transition towards a more sustainable and peaceful world. Earth Charter International program inspires and engages young people to helping development and enhance their knowledge and capacity. In current time, Earth Charter International reaches approximately 200 young people per year. To generate bigger impacts, Earth Charter International is looking for sponsorships to reach a number 500 young people per year. The Leadership Sustainable and Ethics program involved a 10-week online courses designed for young people. 18 30 years old offered with the purpose to enhance their knowledge, values, and skills to become sustainable leaders. Earth Charter International provides and facilitates online communication channels with the help for social media to foster community building, share resource materials, and create space for active engagement. Through the website, Earth Charter International keeps youth informed on educational opportunities, captures stories of young people implementing the Earth Charter in their communities, and showcases good practice. So, continuing the activity, I present the Executive Director, Mirian Vilela, from the Earth Charter International Secretariat. Ms. Miriam, are you here?
Hi, Rocio. Yes, I'm here, and I appreciate the efforts of the three of you of putting together this wonderful webinar, which I believe will generate a number of good insights. So
welcome to the activity. Thank you, Ms. Miriam. Thank you for staying in this virtual activity for youth. Thank you very much. This is your space, Ms. Miriam. Welcome.
Okay, thank you, Rocio, and thank you, Karen and Julian. So basically, I'm very happy to share with you some thoughts on what is the Earth Charter and maybe a little bit on the relevance for the current times. So the Earth Charter it's actually could be seen as three things. One is a document that is actually articulates the values and principles that could guide us towards a more just, sustainable, and peaceful world. In this document is actually considered as an ethical framework, and is the result of a worldwide multicultural, multi-sectoral dialogue on what are those values and principles that should frame the narrative around sustainability. And this dialogue and consultation took place during the decade of the 90s, and it emerged out of the Earth Summit that was held in 92. The whole idea of the Earth Charter was actually first saw in the report of the Brundtland Commission that was launched in 1987. That's called or known as our Common Future. And in that report, the Brundtland Commission indicated the importance for a new charter to guide mainly states towards a more sustainable world, which would be then seen as this charter that articulates the values and principles. The Earth Charter was part of the negotiations and the agenda of the Rio Earth Summit in 92, and then was taken to a civil society initiative back in 94. And it was launched in the year 2000. So now the Earth Charter is actually a global movement that that involves individuals and organizations from around the world that have embraced the whole idea or worldview that is articulated in the Earth Charter. So all of you are actually more than invited to take a close look at the Earth Charter. It's available in various languages, in English, Spanish. I mean, I think over 60 languages it has been translated. All of these different translations is available on the website. So therefore, all of you are invited to take a look at this vision that is articulated in the Earth Charter and embrace it and apply it to your spheres of work. So the Earth Charter is a document. It's also a global movement, and there's a international secretariat that is the organization that it coordinates this global movement that is based here in Costa Rica on the campus of the University for Peace. Let me briefly share with you a couple of key ideas that are articulated in the Earth Charter. So it has a preamble, 16 principles that are organized in 4 parts, and a conclusion that's called the way forward. But the Earth Charter really articulates a couple of key ideas, such as the whole notion of universal responsibility, the importance to elevate our consciousness with regards to how much we are responsible for the common good in the various levels that we are working on. So the Earth Charter does articulate that notion of universal responsibility, but also common but differentiated responsibility, which is very important for the whole negotiations or approaching or addressing climate change. So in Principle 2B of the Earth Charter, you see a whole notion that elevates or has the intention to expand our understanding that we need to understand that the more power we have, the more capacity we have, therefore, and the more knowledge, therefore, the more responsibility we have to address the common good. So that's one of the key notions that is articulated in the Earth Charter. Another one is the whole notion of interdependence that we can see now that we are living in this current crisis of the pandemic. I think it's more evident the importance that globalization and the civilization should be really heading towards an era that we really understand in a different level the sense of interdependence that goes beyond our cultural differences and political borders. So the whole notion of interdependence is the second one I wanted to mention. And another one that is very well articulated in the preamble of the Earth Charter is the notion of Earth community, that we are really part of an Earth community, not only the sense of belonging to the countries where we come from. So the 16 principles are articulated in 4 parts. The first one is the whole notion of respect and care for the community of life. So this notion is very important for us to I mean, this whole idea of elevating, well, let me say that I think the Earth Charter, one of the key purposes of the Earth Charter is to expand and deepen our understanding of what is that we are part of a community of life, and we need to amplify our notion of responsibility and care for the community of life. So there's a whole worldview that is articulated here that goes beyond an anthropocentric approach, and it's a more life-centric or ecocentric approach with this notion of we are part of a community of life on this planet. And then there is the second part of the Earth Charter articulates principles around ecological integrity. The third is on social and economic justice, and the fourth part is on democracy, nonviolence, and peace. So when the Earth Charter was launched in the year 2000, we're celebrating, by the way, 20 years since the launch of the Earth Charter. The whole vision here was already seen that all these dimensions and principles are interrelated and interdependent among them. So there's a systemic nature that is articulated in this vision of values and principles that are here enunciated in the Earth Charter. So it sees that the whole agenda of peace is also part of the agenda on environmental protection and, of course, social and economic justice, and vice versa. So since the launch of the Earth Charter as a document, as an ethical framework, it's being seen more and more as an ethical compass, as a guide or as a map that lays or gives visibility to these values and principles that humanity actually share and ought to live by if we are to reach a more just and sustainable world. So people have found many different ways to implement, to apply, to practice the Earth Charter, and I hope during this online forum we'll have more time to hear about this. I think that's it from my part. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Miriam, explain about the big importance for Earth Charter. In the next template, my colleague Karen explained about the purpose of the Earth Charter and climate change. Karen, is yours the presentation.
Well, yeah, thank you, Miriam. It was a great explanation about Earth Charter, and actually it's pretty related with the things that I'm going to talk to you. And actually, as Miriam says, the most important thing of Earth Charter is that the Earth Charter inspired to us to have this shared responsibility and to and be aware that we have this sense of interdependence around the world. Yeah, so the most important thing about how the Earth Charter and climate change are related is that we have to think that the climate change, it's not just impact the environment, but also has an impact on the society and the economy as well in different ways. We have to think that things that happen on one side of the world also affect the other side across the ocean, actually. So the Earth Charter invites to us to understand this thing that we have to change our mind, actually, our system, extending ethical awareness as a part of the climate action, and to guide us to take a more sustainable lifestyle, not just on our job, but also on every day in our life. So we have to take action from our house, our family, our friends, and then to other people. So the Earth Charter is inspiring us to take action from the ethical values, and it's the most important thing that we have to take of Earth Charter. So other important thing that Air Charter has is that it's a reference of many countries around the world and many actually offices, United Nations offices, to take action. That's why Rocio is going to talk about how UNESCO approved like its Air Charter. So it's very important actually that UNESCO has this resolution of the Air Charter. So Rocio, please tell us about this important thing.
Thank you, Karen. Well, I'll explain about the Fourth General Conference of UNESCO, held between 12 and 27 of November 2019, adopted the resolution that reaffirms the importance of the Air Charter as an ethical framework for sustainable development. You can use this document to apply the Air Charters in the high school, in the universities, in your life too. So the resolution explains important points. The reference of this resolution is Air Charter and 40 resolution 1220. In the statement, UNESCO encouraged member states to use the Air Charter in education for sustainable development processes in the implementation of the new Education Sustainable Development for 2030 framework and connection with the 2017 UNESCO Declaration of Ethical Principles in relation to climate change. Karen? Hello? Karen, are you here? Well, so the next template explain about what is climate change. Worldwide for Nature say that a change in global or regional climate patterns caused by the increasing levels of the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere since the Industrial Revolution as a result of the use of the fossil fuels. So in this template explain about the greenhouse gases. My colleague Karen, are you listening to me? Karen? Well, okay, continue. And the greenhouse gases in this template, not to see the carbon dioxide, CO2, nitrous oxide, NO2, methane, CH4, water vapor, H2O, ozone, O3. Air Charter young leaders present this opinion for the greenhouse gases, the situation for the environment and the climate change. And so this is an analysis for the Air Charter young leaders. The greenhouse gases produced by natural way, they make the air habitable and they prevent heat from spilling into space. Karen, are you here? Hello? Okay, the continue the activity, the causes and consequence of Okay, sorry. Okay, so continuing the activity. Okay, es aquí. Okay, causes and consequences of climate change. One, increase of greenhouse gases. Two, livestock production. Three, deforestation. Four, industry. Five, agriculture and use of fertilizers. Six, decomposition of waste. Seven, energy generation. Eight, use of aerosol. And nine, activities associated with the industry. That's the signification for the climate change. Hello, Karen, are you here?
Hello.
Hello?
Yeah, sorry, really sorry. I had problems with my internet. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can. We are hear you. Don't worry, it's okay.
Oh, sorry. I don't know if I wasn't in the explaining the greenhouse gases, right?
Yeah, right.
Could
Continue,
you hear
Karen.
me?
Yeah, we are hear
Well,
you. We are hear you.
okay. Well, as I was saying, these greenhouse gases occur naturally in the atmosphere, but we are making that these gases are increasing with our human activity. Can you please put the slide before, please, Rocio? Yeah, this. So this is there are some examples about the human activity that are increasing these gases. For example, the livestock production, deforestation, industry, agriculture, decomposition waste, energy generation, or activities associated with the industry, as I said. So this is some examples. There are some examples about the human activity, but there are more. Obviously, there are more activities that we are, like, for example, with our cars every day. Well, we are using cars every day. Well, in almost every country. For example, here in Costa Rica, we have to use the cars because it's almost impossible to move without a card. Well, we can do it, absolutely, but it's easier with a car. But it's a human activity that it's pretty dangerous for climate change. So can we change the slide, please? So now we were talking about the greenhouse gases and how and some causes about climate change and some examples of that. But as I mentioned, these causes, we have a big impact on a society. It causes something that it calls climate inequality or climate injustice. I don't know if you know about this term, and it's pretty important to talk about this. It's very important to be aware about this because it includes our human rights. And many people around the world are suffering because of climate change, and we don't imagine that it's because of that. For example, in fact, many policies about climate change don't consider the most vulnerable realities, such as indigenous or rural communities, or child, or the poorest people. So, for example, we can see here some consequences like damage to health, extreme weather events, or increased probability of fires, And all of these things have an impact in our society, and of course in our environment, like increasing the global temperature, that it makes some natural phenomena happen. And so all the things that you are seeing, we're gonna have an impact in our human rights, for example, in our society, and our economy, of course. Can we change the slide, please? So the consequence that we were saying in the slide before, as I was saying, cause the climate injustice, and cause the vulnerability of our human rights, and this has an impact on international terms. For example, if we don't have more places to have tourism, many people who work at tourism sector, they won't have a job anymore. And then, for example, other people who live in, for example, I don't know, in the coast zone, and they have to go to another communities because it's impossible to live anymore there, because of its drier, for example, or this kind of things, and it's pretty difficult for them because probably they don't have the facilities to go to another place. For example, me, in my case, I can say that, okay, if I don't have the conditions to live here, I can move on to another place. It's not too difficult. It's not too easy, but it's not too difficult to do it. And I can go to another place to live and to find another conditions to live with water, with food, with better climate to live. But other communities and other people, for example, the poorest people, can say that, and it's impossible to them. So we have to think about these people. And for example, we have the lack of water and sanitation, that it's a pretty important thing to live, or energy poverty. And about this, it's pretty important to start to talk, because many governments are working in many policies to change the energy way, for example, to a solar way, for example. But many people doesn't have the money, or their houses are not made for that, and it's impossible that many people can have this kind of energy in their house, even if they want. So we have to think about this as well, that not many people can change their energy or their life, because it's almost impossible. And we have to take decisions thinking on these communities. And finally, we have no food security. That is a thing that if we don't change, our lifestyle now, and if we don't work right now, probably in, I don't know, 10 years or 20 years, probably the things that you are eating today, that it's pretty easy to buy on the supermarket, or you have in your house, pretty easy, and it's cheap to have it. Probably in 10 years or 20 years, if the climate change is still like right now, it's gonna be probably so difficult to get it. So we have to take care about the food security as well. If you want to feel, okay. So now we were talking about the basics, actually the basics of climate change, because we are not experts, course, of climate change, but we wanted to give you like an examples or basics about climate change, just to understand the situation that we will talk about. And that's why we have a great example about climate change is causing many disasters, for example, in the world. And that's why we have actually an expert, Dr. Paul Darcy, and thanks to being with us, that who is a climate change expert, and will speak to us about the bushfires in Australia. Welcome, the forum is yours, Dr. Darcy. Thank you for being with us.
Okay, well, thank you, Karen, and welcome everyone. It's wonderful to be online, and particularly thanks to the three organizers for organizing this wonderful forum, and also to Miriam, Rocio, Karen, and Julian for your wonderful introduction. I'm going to talk specifically about the forest fires, but it's important that we started with the wider picture, because these are really a symptom rather than a topic in themselves. They're a symptom of a wider problem, which is climate change. This has been called in the world the existential threat to humanity, and that it's of that magnitude that we are endangering the whole human species for reasons that Karen just talked about. So I'm going to do three things today. Firstly, just talk about how big these fires were, because they're on a scale that we've not seen before. And we need to realize that. Because although Australia is a very dry continent, these have really been seen as a way of the future, that if we don't change what we're doing to our environment, this could become more normal than not normal. So I'll look at the magnitude, then I'll move on to the bigger picture, really, and a battle between science versus politics. And in some ways, it's intergenerational. That I think your generation are much more familiar and willing to accept the science than an older generation. And we have a problem throughout the world that the older generation tends to have political power, the younger generation have ideas, but often have to wait and do their time before they can get into positions of influence. That will lead me on to my third point, which is I do think that is changing rapidly through things like the internet and online forums like this, that I do think that youth of the world and scientists can come together and bring about positive change rapidly. And I'll be finishing on an optimistic note by proposing that it's not just about reducing emissions into the air, we can actually get back in your lifetimes to how we were prior to the Industrial Revolution. Okay, so the first point then about the magnitude of the bushfires. We're talking about a 6 to 7 month period. The Australian summer, so in the Southern Hemisphere, our summer is centered on Christmas and 2 to 3 months either side of that. Now, 33 people were killed. A lot more, probably thousands, will die of smoke-related deaths over the next 3 years. We were fortunate to only lose 4 firefighters and 33 people. But what was really different and significant is that we lost over 11 million hectares of forest. And I'll show you a bit later, that is an increase of a magnitude 10-fold, 20-fold in what previous fire seasons have caused. And at least 1 billion what species of wildlife were killed because of these fires. So more people have died in earlier bushfire seasons, but what is really devastating about this is that, as I say, it's a way of the future. More vegetation was burnt than ever before, and more wildlife were killed. The 1 billion figure is a conservative estimate. If we could have the next slide, please, Rocio. Thank you. Okay. So this is, I live in Canberra, which is in the interior mountain range of Australia, about 90 kilometers from the coast. And this is showing the bushfires approaching, the closest they got to Canberra. They were within a couple of kilometers of the urban area. This is the Namadgi National Park. And that forest fires, you can see there, they were heights of hundreds of meters. And they were moving incredibly fast. They were faster than a running human being. So they're very devastating, very graphic, and really a danger. In all my slides, I've put references there online for you to check out to follow up if you want. If we could have the next slide, please. Okay, so the first 5 figures that bring about the magnitude of this. Most forest fire seasons in the Australian summer burn around 300,000 hectares. This one burnt at least 12.6 million hectares. So it's a massive increase. And you can see there, the forest is not totally destroyed, but it's massively destroyed. And virtually it's not habitable for wildlife species for the next few months. There has to be human intervention to help. Next slide. Forests, excuse me, forests are a carbon absorber, so they're vital for the planet, often been called the lungs of the planet, in that they take carbon out of the air or keep it from going into the air. So what the burning did is it removed a carbon sink, but it also pumped millions of tons of carbon into the air. So from our forest fire season, September 1st of last year to February 23 of this year, when widespread rainfall caused an end to the fires, we had carbon emissions just from forest fires alone that would be equal to 3/4 of human industry emissions in Australia. So that was a massive increase, let's say, and also on top of the fact that we'd lost the carbon sink. So this was really a climatic disaster in many ways. And these figures, again, are conservative. They're based on estimates, as we'll talk about a bit later. Next slide, please. And here, this is a very graphic illustration of taken by NASA to show those forest fires going right across the Pacific Ocean, which takes up 1/3 of the globe. And I was in Chile at the time. You can see that the forest fires there are touching Peru and Chile. I remember being in Chile in late January, and the cloud, you could see the forest fire smoke in the air in Santiago. So these are huge events. They're dangerous, and the black carbon is dangerous to the planet for global warming. It's also dangerous for human health and taking in too much of it. Next slide, please. And here we see the smoke. This is Australia's biggest city, Sydney. The forest fires got to within 25 kilometers of the urban area of Sydney. And what we see, that figure there, that almost 50% of Australia's total population of 25 million were directly affected by forest fire smoke. They were breathing in smoke for week upon week upon week on end, to the point where my university, the Australian National University, was actually closed down because it was seen that the buildings, if they didn't have sufficient air conditioning, they were seen as a health hazard. And we're going to see the implications of that over the next 3 to 4 years, with increased problems with respiratory illness and so on. Okay, next slide, please. Again, coming up to that figure, again, just under half of people became anxious either about their own safety or members of their family or friends close to them. So perhaps for the first time in human history, almost 50% of the world of a population were directly affected by climate change. And that's been one of the big problems for youth organizations and for scientists, is that trying to make people aware that this is an immediate threat. Well, after these forest fires, there's no way we can say they're not. Almost half of the population felt directly affected or knew someone that was. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and the figure that's come out, an estimated 1 billion wildlife fauna were killed, and many more will probably die as well, as they're facing injury or they're facing starvation. Now, this is a conservative estimate. So if I could go on to the next slide. I won't go all into the detail of this. You've got the reference there and the links to it. But basically what they did is they used published estimates of the flora of the animal and wildlife density in the forest that were burnt, and then times that by the amount of hectares burnt to come up with a rough figure. Now they point out that that 1 billion figure of wildlife lost was only based on an estimate of 6.25 million hectares burnt, whereas in fact by the end of the season, this study was done before the season, double that had been burnt. So at a conservative estimate, we're talking 2 billion wildlife being killed. Now, again, the estimate of density per forest area is only based on certain species that we had data for. So many species such as bats, frogs, and fish, where we did not have scientific data, were not included in the estimate. So Professor Dixon of Sydney, the ecologist of the University of Sydney that did this study, says that if we actually include all the species and expand our estimates, with perhaps as many as 240 billion vertebrates and invertebrates were killed in these fires. So it's an absolute ecological disaster that we'll never know the true magnitude of, but 1 billion is a convenient marker to show the extent of those fires. Now, of course, this raises the question for the future: if we're going to get these increasing forest fires, are we looking at mass extinctions of many vulnerable species? Next slide, please. In the aftermath, we saw this is a really badly burnt out area I think that's in southern New South Wales, near the coast. As you can see, if the animals survive that fire by either being burrowing animals that can escape the flames underground, or they manage to outrun it, such as kangaroos, when they come back, they've got nothing to eat or to drink, and so they're going to have a slow starvation. The next slide, please. Okay, so the magnitude is quite horrific in what we've seen. The question is, was it a one-off? Is it going to be the way of the future? So I want to talk about scientific warnings and the scientific data suggesting that no, it is directly related to climate change, and it is, if we do not change our way of behaving, as our earlier speakers have talked about, it could be the way for the rest of the world if we're not careful. So I'll talk about that, and then I'll talk about our immediate responses, both science and politics, before moving on to my last and perhaps most important section, what we can do and the positive future we can have if we turn this around. Okay, the next slide, please. Tim Flannery is one of our leading public scientists, and he points out that the Australian Climate Council and climate scientists have been publishing data predicting this since 1985. But again, that problem I've talked about before, if it's not immediate in the public's vision, then it's very hard to keep it in the public debate. And he mentioned that it was very hard to get people to talk, the government to listen to them, to take them seriously, to divert money away from other activities into climate mitigation. But he points out that their climate data, which I'll show in a minute in slides, suggests that these are going to become increasingly frequent events and increasingly severe. And that's a real concern. Okay, next slide, please. This graph brings it out dramatically. So you see, this is really from 1900 through to the current year, 2020. And what we're looking at there is the average mean temperature above or below the average temperature. So what we see is increasingly since the 1980s, the climate has been getting hotter and hotter. And 2019 was a record. 2020, we don't have the data in yet, but it's looking of the same magnitude. So that data is pretty clear that something is changing. Now, there's a lot of climate deniers, a lot of people saying, well, there's natural increases as well as human increase. But if we just looked at a bigger graph going further back in time, it's pretty clear that industrialization is a major factor behind this, and it's accelerating. Next slide, please. The area in the red there in the map is the most rain-fed part of Australia. So it's the southeast corner where most of the population live, and the red areas are forest reserves that all went on fire. Now you'll see about midway down the coast, Sydney, a city of almost 5 million people. You see the two areas, the Blue Mountains of the Wollemi National Park. Those forest fires were ringing Sydney. When you're in Sydney, you could see the red on the horizon every night. Our second biggest city, Melbourne, you see, was free of the forest fires this time, but a few years earlier it had direct fires as well. So much of the coastal high-density forest, which was very high animal species because it was such a fertile environment, was burnt out. And the problem with that is, of course, that not only the immediate loss of life, it's also how do we go about preserving the existing wildlife in these formerly well-watered, highly fertile forests that are now desolate wastelands for the next few years. Next slide, please. And you see particularly in the top left-hand graph there, this large dark green area, which is closed forest. So although more vegetation is burned in the past in other types of vegetation, this is high density, high carbon producing from fires, deep high density forest that was burnt. And that explains the fires I showed you going right across to Chile. Next slide, please. And what we see, though, that we should remember that the black areas in the southeast corner there, the lower right-hand corner, are where most of the forest fires were, but there was also a lot of fires throughout Australia at the time, in the north, the arid north, and the savanna lands, in the west of Australia as well, and much of Tasmania, which is our wettest part of Australia. So the continent was drier than usual, and it burnt more than usual, putting a lot more forest of carbon into the air from vegetation. Next slide, please. And here we see it quite graphically. This is on January the 4th, with these fires burning from Sydney right down to the south, dense fires. And I'm from New Zealand originally. I remember my friends calling me saying that the glaciers in the west coast of the South Island of New Zealand had turned pink and red from the smoke and the emissions. So this was on the way across the Pacific. Next slide, please. I won't go into this too much, but basically, because this is such a fertile environment, many species have lost much of their habitat. A huge amount of those species that are listed there lost over 30% of their natural habitat. So we either have to spend a lot of money rebuilding that habitat, or seal off the remaining habitat and make sure it's not endangered in future. Next slide, please. Just two examples here. The Blue Mountains are just to the west of Sydney, and the Blue Mountain water skink was almost on the verge of extinction before the fires. Now so much of its habitat has been lost, they're now taking emergency measures to preserve it. But there were some success stories. The Wollemi National Park, just north of Sydney, some of the oldest trees in the world, the Wollemi pines, which were around when the dinosaurs were there, there was only 100 left in the wild, and that you see them here in this narrow gully. So one of the rescue stories was that Australian Parks Board employees were going in there, were being helicoptered in, you see all the fire all around them, and they were actually saved this last stand of ancient forest from burning, which will allow it to be restocked and repopulate now. So there were some success stories. Next slide, please. Australia is a dry continent, and its vegetation is adapted to fire, but not on the scale or intensity that we saw. So even as early as January and February, some of the first burnt forests in northern New South Wales that were burnt in October and November, as you can see here, were starting to regenerate. And they were the branches were starting to come out again. Next slide, please. And they're starting to shoot vegetation that will allow species to feed off them. But that's going to take a couple of years. So what do we do in the meantime for the fauna? Well, there's a few emergency measures that have been put in place. If we can show the next slide, please. So the first thing is there'll be food and water stations in regular places, and they'll bring in water and drop food by helicopter for the next few years, so that species will know that there is a place of food, they can come and they can get water. There's been injured wildlife have been cared for in emergency veterinary hospitals, and they're being cared for and then rehabilitated into the wild. There's also a campaign of eradication of wild introduced animals and weeds that have come in when the natural species have been removed. We don't want them to take over the habitat, so there's been some culling of that to try and make sure that there's a habitat for the natural species to come back to. And there's also now plans for changes to conservation orders to preserve more of the endangered environments and to have more protections in place for the remaining natural animals and plants. Next slide, please. Okay, so just a couple of pictures of this. So this is a number of koala. This was, I think, on Kangaroo Island in South Australia, where they were rescued by humans and put into shelters and this is the laundry of the house, where they were given water and just basically giving shelter from fires that were still ongoing at the time. None of these koala have been injured or burnt by the fire, so they were the lucky ones. Next slide, please. Species that could be rescued have then been treated and looked after by vets. And there's been an international effort here, and vets have flown in from all over the world to apply triage, emergency care, then to rehabilitate the species and allow them to go back into the wild. Next one, please. And here are those food drops. So carrots. So you'll see these are bush wallabies that are feeding off the carrot drop, and you drop that in the same place every time. And you'll also remove rats and other invasive species that will compete for the food to give those animals a chance to get back until the bush starts to regrow. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, now looking at the bigger picture, politics versus science, and particularly how I think young people in the world are already combining with science. And as I've said, I teach environmental courses at the Australian National University, and I find that often I feel like a bit of a fraud because most of my young audience know far more about the specifics than I do. I'm really just giving them a chance to voice their own ideas. And I should point out that my courses are basically about problem solving. I think young people have the solutions already. What they lack is political empowerment. So this section is about how do we combine the science with the political will to bring about these positive changes. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, I've listed here 5 factors. There are forces behind Australia's lack of engagement with climate change mitigation. We've seen this, we're all frustrated with the international fora on how do we bring about carbon reductions, and it frustrates us a lot. I tend to think we have to understand our opponents rather than denigrate them. If we want to bring about change, we have to persuade our opponents. So I look at why are people doing this? They're making, by their criteria, rational choices. We have to show them that there is a more rational choice, which is about climate reduction, carbon reduction, bringing about positive climates. So in Australia, natural gas and coal are 2 of our largest income earners. And they're particularly prominent in remote rural areas where there's very limited alternative jobs. So there's a real incentive there, economic incentive, to keep these industries going. You may admit that they're harmful, but you say, well, until such time as you can present an alternative, we're going to keep doing them. Carbon emitting industries make a lot of profit, and they have a strong lobby in political circles. And we particularly see this in the US, where there are no limits on political donations. In most other democracies in the world, there are limits on how much you can donate to a political person, so that they don't fall privy to undue influence. We've also seen that COVID-19, while it has reduced emissions dramatically through the lack of transport and traffic and movement of people, it's also diverted attention and funds away from climate mitigation. And there's now also a fear that post-COVID-19 global economic collapse. These are legitimate concerns. So we need to show that the overriding economic security is the main issue that most voters vote on. We have to show that climate change mitigation is actually good for the economy. So the US Green New Deal that was portrayed as a cost by its opponents, and its advocates showed that they did show that it would create more and better jobs, but I don't think they really showed just how much the economy would boom from it, and more importantly, how much carrying on as we are doing was going to cost the economy. You're going to become uncompetitive. You're going to have all sorts of national costs through increased health problems, increased need to clean up the environment. Next slide, please. There are forces for good that are happening, and I am an optimist by nature. Teaching young people on climate change leaves you with no other feeling. So states and local governments, if the national governments are not acting, they are acting. And we're seeing this locally is the real power, because people are living with environmental damage. So states like California, for example, while their national government has been backward and coming forwards and is pulling out of many climate change agreements, California is a world leader in carbon reduction and climate change mitigation efforts. So locally, there's a groundswell there. Industry, there are many industries, not all industry is bad, but many industries are very, very good. And they just realized for economic reasons as well as moral reasons that it's actually a silly policy to carry on as before. The world economy is changing. It's moving to low carbon emitting, environmentally friendly economies. Remember that you have to, and voters are voting with their purchase power. Increasingly, those with income are aware of what's going on, and they're boycotting industries that are polluters. So there are strong economic reasons for industry to get on board, and they are in ways that we've probably not even realized. Public demonstrations are increasing, and particularly amongst your generation. And it's becoming, even if you oppose rapid climate mitigation as in political or industry, you don't say so. You have, at the very least, a token statement that you are pro it, even if you're not doing it alternatively. And the big power to me is rising alternative media, that mainstream TV channels are now being replaced amongst the young. Most of you now get your information from sponsorship free or sponsorship lower alternative media online. And so it's very hard to hide what's going on. It's very easy to get information. Okay, next slide, please. What I now want to finish with the last 3 slides is a vision for the future that can, and I think should occur in your lifetimes by 2050. While we're still arguing over can we get CO2 emissions down, in other words, reduce the amount of carbon we're pumping into the environment, increasingly now scientists are showing that we actually have the technical means already. We don't have to invent new technology to actually bring atmospheric carbon levels down to pre-industrial levels. of 270 parts per million by 2050. So that's what we think the climate was about the 1780s, before the Industrial Revolution. If we can do this, we can actually suck the carbon out of the air and bring about avoid this existential threat to humanity. And these two, I've given you this online talk by Peter Waterman and Peter Fikowski, two of my favorite scientists, do some wonderful work. But they're also optimists and innovators. And they're saying, we can do this. We have the science. What we need is youth, religious, and community leaders to lobby with us to governments to change our targets from pathetic carbon reduction to actually carbon removal. Next slide, please. Now, particularly appealing to my Latin American audience here, but I'm also very aware that some of my fellow ANU researchers amongst the postgraduate community are online here. So forgive me for just addressing this at the Latin American audience, but I was very lucky when my good friend Ambassador Marcelino Aviles arranged me to visit Panama last year, and then, as I said, I was able to go to Chile last year. And really, this is an incredibly innovative continent. And it's innovative because you've got young leaders and young people making a difference. And as a historian by training, an environmental historian, I'm aware of the wider picture. Latin America has actually taken the lead before in an existential threat to the world, which was nuclear proliferation. I come from Australia, where everyone talks about the Great Barrier Reef, marine protected area, the park, but in fact, it was Ecuador with the Galapagos Islands that had the first marine protected area in the Pacific. It wasn't Australia. And Panama Smithsonian is one of the world's leaders in mangrove restoration and tropical rainforest conservation, both important carbon absorbers. As I've said, Latin America led the world in the 80s in joining with the South Pacific nations, where I work, in creating the world's largest nuclear-free zone, which covered 1/3 of the Earth's surface. So I think we have the science, we have the political and community precedents from the past, that it's now time to push to go beyond these ridiculous reducing carbon emissions to actually getting carbon restoration and conservation of our carbon sinks. Okay, I'm sorry I went a bit over time, but I'll leave it. We go to the next slide, which is the nuclear-free zone, and we'll leave it there. So the dark blue area, again, I really hate where the Pacific is divided in all world maps, but it covers 1/3 of the globe, and it was all nuclear-free. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Dr. Darcy, for your participation and explain about the big importance for bushfires from Australia. His Excellency Marcelino Vilela Valdespino, Ambassador of the Republic of Panama. This is the first ambassador in Panama and Australia. Ambassador, are you here?
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, perfect. Okay. All right. First of all, I want to thanks to the Earth Charter for this organization of this event. And I congratulate you, like Mr. Darcy, he was saying before, because the new leaders have to be talking about the climate change, which is something very important. We have only a couple of years to 2030, which is going to be the ODR objectives of development sustainable for the world, that the United Nations has this goal for 2030, and we are in 2020 already. So we have to think about and rethink what we are doing as a human natures, and with all the situation that the world is having right now with the coronavirus. I think it's a lot of people are home, are isolated, and they have people. We are having opportunity to be ourselves. Think about it. If we need something, if we really need to purchase something, right now you can see many pictures in the world where you can see animals walking around on the streets. You can see animals and they are in the lakes, in the oceans. Today I was watching one video. There was a whale between some of the little boats are in a port. This situation that happened in Australia the end of the last year and this year um, give us to us an opportunity as well here in this part of the world to see what is going on. As Rocio said, I'm the first resident ambassador of Panama in Australia. We didn't have opportunity to have a mission, a physical mission before. We have a relation since 1974, Panama and Australia, and we decided this time, this was the proper time to do it because now with the telecommunications, it's easier to have access to part of the world that you before seen as something remotely, like very far away. And we have been working pretty hard between the relations and between both countries. And we have been doing strengthens in education and commerce, transportation, cultural, and so on. And we appreciate Mr. Paul Larze got opportunity to accept an invitation and go to Panama last year to talk about international relations and the security in this part of the world. So uh, I had a very interesting experience being here, especially with this situation with the climate change. As he said, this year was the worst that he saw before, and you can feel it. You can feel it in the environment that was a little bit even hotter than before. And but the time of November and December, that was even the worst part. I got my sister, for example, she went for Christmas to visit their parents, and then when she arrived home, they in the middle of the night they had this call of emergency and they saw fires in the backside of their yard. I mean, not in the yard, they were in the mountains that were very close to them, so they have to pack all their belongings and took away and run away from their own house. Hundreds of people they have to leave from their houses, and there were a lot of damages. The DFA, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, used to take us to diplomatic community to teach us and train us and give us to us advices. As you saw in the first line, in the first image, there were people explaining to us from the Department of Fires what we have to do in case of we have to leave home. For me, it was a totally different experience. I come from Panama, which is if you can see, is one of them countries that have more water in the world. That's why we have the Panama Canal. We live with water. For us, the water is very important, and we know that we have to take care of it. And we have a very green country, so we have a lot of forests as well, and that we understand the situation with when you have forests and you have to take care of those, but you never have to be aware or have, in my case, to have an opportunity to be in a fire situation itself. Here in the cities, they were very difficult. We can tell you that the smoke that was the most difficult part around ACT, where we are, Australian Capital Territory, and we could see in those time when the sky changed a different color, changed in the color kind of like bright between dark and then where it's kind of red sometimes. And I learned something very interesting. Every single day that I wake up, I download apps to check how was the fire, how have been the fire during the day and during the night, and how is the quality of the air. Never in my life I have to be worried about the quality of the air, because thanks God I have been living in the countries that the quality of the air have been good. So other people don't have that opportunity. So that impact myself, not only me, the people surround myself. So I have to learn to live with that. And there was kind of a, sometimes it was kind of a stressful, because you didn't know exactly what to do. And but as long as the people from default tell you you have to do this and this, you have to take your emergency pack, and you have to drive immediately if there isn't any emergency, we will allow you know through your cell phones and through the TV and social media, we will explain to you where to go. And usually it's in against the fire. So you can see here, these mountains, you clearly can see the fire over there, which is something very unusual for me. This is the house for a friend of mine. They have in the backside of the mountain, you can see there's a fire in there. So there was a couple of days that you not even couldn't leave from houses. You have to stay inside. And if you go to work, you have to get inside the car and leave right away to the office. And when you get into the office, right away into into the premises, just to be as much as possible inside, so you are not getting the smoke in your lungs. That was very interesting, because every time that we have to leave, and you can see more pictures over there. I think there is a video that so you can see a little bit about the fires, what it looks like. I think Dr. Darcy, he showed what the fires did. This is what is my experience, that we have to see all this, and for me was very impact. Can we see the next laminate, please? Here it's what we had to do it. So this mask that you can see here is the same mask that have been recommended now. It's the N95. These ones are permanent. The other ones that sometimes I've recommended for the COVID-19s are not permanent. So this one, if you don't have any more, you can use this one, but you have to clean it with warm water when you get home. Have to be very careful when you take it out and or clean it. For me, was a very first time to use one of this masks. Never used it before. So when you wear on the street, you can feel the stress of the people, the business that were affected, people that were affected itself, and nobody knows what is going to be the results for the human health in the future with this situation that happened. You can see there's a picture with a car in there, and there's a smoke. The smoke are very big, and the was very thick. Um, when you went to the street, and when you sometimes one of the days they were just everything clear, and then a couple of minutes that was totally covered with smoke. This smoke was the close to the airport. I was driving a car, and had opportunity to feel this. That was kind of a scary, because you know, the smoke was there, the fire was close to you, and so you have to be aware with this situation where it's happening. Can we see the next laminate, please? Yep. Well, as I told you at the beginning, we have been trying to get the relations between Australia and Panama, try to strengthen both, because we think the both countries we can do a lot of things together. Yes, we were in a multicultural festival in Canberra last February. This was our last time when we were out before the COVID-19, and we have the visitor, the multicultural shadow minister Elizabeth Kickett. She was there, and well, the slots are very popular down here in Australia, and we have plenty in Panama. You guys have koalas, and we have slots. So we did an exchange over there. So we know that we have to take care of our environment. We know that we are not the only um, people that live in the earth, the animals, they are as well part of this environment, and we have to take care of it. Next slide. Of course, we get a visit for the first journalist. She went to Panama. Her name is Sophie Kinsteven. She is from ABC, and she got opportunity to visit our country and saw the sloths and learn the way they live, the way they eat, the way they have the way of life. Of course, between the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and the tourism authority of my country and the embassy, we got opportunity to went to visit our country. And of course, she tried the most expensive coffee in the world when she was there. And but she was in the middle of a COVID-19. So she got locked down when she crossed to Costa Rica, and she came back to Australia. She's free, she's fine. We are so happy. Nothing happened to her. She didn't get the COVID, and she is recovering over here. She did a quarantine, so she's fine. And we really appreciate it, because these activities like this can help us to strain together our relations, especially in the environment situations. We can exchange a lot of issues together. The Panama, as we are experts in the tropical disease. Australia, it's expert in other researches. So we are working pretty hard right now with the COVID-19, and I'm pretty sure that we will find something good for the world, and we will win this war. I think this is the last slide. I think, Rocio, I think this is the last one, right?
Yes, you're right. This is your last slide.
All right, and we're all, thank you so much, Rocio, and the Chapter of Earth, and the young leaders from the Earth Charter, and international promoters of the objective of sustainable development, and the young people of the climate change for organize this interesting meeting with Mr. Paul Darcy and all you guys. And we get an opportunity to be exposed to different people here in Australia and other part of the world. And thank you so much, everybody, for taking your time for being with us today.
Thank you very much again, Ambassador Marcelino, and special my friend from Australia, Dr. Paul Darcy, stay in this conference for the youth. Well, the next slide, Karen explain about what can we do who has Earth Charter. Karen, are you here?
Yes, thank you, Rocio, and thank you, Dr. Paul Darcy and the Ambassador Marcelino for being here with us and share your experience and your knowledge about these bushfires in Australia. And thank you to Dr. Darcy for sharing with us your perspective from a scientific perspective. So now we will talk about how to use the Earth Charter as a tool to take action for climate. And we will talk about all the things that happened in Australia with the bushfires and all the consequences about that, and around of this sad thing, because it was pretty sad. I think that it's pretty sad to lose species like koala, for example, that it's an important species, and actually all the species are important because they have a special function for our planet. So the Earth Charter wants to inspire to us to take action. So the Earth Charter is like a tool. If you don't know how to act, and if you don't know how to start to take action, or with an organization on if you want to start to work, but if you don't know how or with, you can go to Earthquater and read it, and you can have an idea what you can do. For example, we have the principle 2 about ecological integrity, and this principle 2 it talks about how to adapt patterns of production and consumption more sustainable. And it talks about as well something very important. Rocio, can you please keep the slide before? Yeah, and it talks about a pretty important thing, that it's about the knowledge about the sustainability and the ecological knowledge, and it talks about the importance that this that education has and in this action for climate change actually. And it talks about protect the integrity of the earth, the ecological systems, and biological diversity and natural process. And because we understand that the earth has a natural process, has a natural phenomenon, so we have to respect that, not act with other human activities that can act in a negative way, for example. And we were talking about that before. So this principle too is pretty important to take action, but before that, to start to be aware of how to start to work from the nature for the nature, and taking care about human rights as well, and education as well, and to work to the community well-being. So can you please go to the next slide, Rocio? So for example, in the same principle 2, but in the point 5, the Earthquater talk about adopt at all levels sustainable development, plans and regulations that make environmental conservation and rehabilitation integral to all development initiatives. And it's pretty important to have this in a conflict, because, for example, in the making decision process, it's pretty important to take the sustainable development as a pretty important point to take decisions. And it's not just to think about, for example, just environment or just economy or just society. It's think and take decisions around of all these things connected. And Earthquater invites us to think about that, all these things connected, and how all these things are related. And if you are working for environment, you have to work actually in indirect or in a direct way for economy or for environment or for society. So we have to take decisions around that. Or for example, the point B, it talks about established and safeguard viable natural and biosphere reserves, including wells, lands, and marine areas to protect Earth's life support systems, maintain biodiversity, and preserve our natural heritage. So it's pretty important that as well. And it talks about how to keep and save our nature areas, and not, for example, make buildings there and destroy all these areas, because it has a special function in our environment and our climate and our place to live actually. And of course, finally promote the recovery of endangered species. For example, in this case with Australia and all the species that are lost because of that, and we have to be aware of that, because the species like koala, for example, have a special function in Australia and our world in general. Even if you don't have koalas in your country, in some way, in some point, is affected by that. So from their charter is like a guide to take action, to start to take action. If you have a project, if you have an initiative, or if you participate in this decision-making process, you must go to read their charter and take these points, these important points to start the project or to take action or your decision-making process, and from this points of air charter start to inspire other people. So that's why the air charter is an important tool to that. So you can go to the air charter website and read it completely, because this is just the principle 2, but it's not all the air charter. The air charter has many principles more, and so you can go there and you can read it more, and you can start to work from the air charter and guide your change of your lifestyle, if you want, of course. So Rocio, can you please start? And finally, we have the point 7, and it's a basic thing about the start to change our lifestyle, and it talks about reduce, reuse, and recycle. And it's something that is it looks like pretty basic, and when someone asks to you like how to change my lifestyle and make it more sustainable, and the basic answer can be this, but it's more complicated for many people, because it talks about change all the lifestyle. But it's pretty important. It's basic, but it's pretty important, and we must start from there. And by this way, we can change our patterns of consumption, actually. So it's like step by step. So and then we have to act with restraint and efficiency when using energy, and it's as well basic. If you don't use your energy in your house, turn off the lights, for example. It's pretty basic and it's pretty easy, and it's a basic thing to start. So this principle about air charter, it talks about basic steps to act, and it's too difficult to do it. Please, Rocio, the next slide. And after that, we were talking about this principle 2, that is just an example of how to start to act, but something important about that, and it's not in the air charter, but like specifically, but it's pretty important to be aware of that, and it's a thing that we can do to take action. And I'd like to highlight how important is the youth in this action for climate, because I guess that almost all here are young or have someone young person at the office or in your family, I don't know. And I'd like to encourage you to join other young people to act. Perhaps so from activists or education, participating in the decision-making process, developing projects with NGOs from your profession, or through investigations. So we have this old youth movement this last, I don't know, 3 years or more actually, it's more time that the youth are we're fighting for climate change. But I guess that with the social media, Facebook, all this kind of social media, it helps that all in the world can realize that youth actually are working together and organize it to raise the awareness about how the importance to act for climate. And for example, you can see in this slide just examples to actions that the youth has done. For example, protests or demonstrations in front of the places where decision making are in their countries, or youth forums on climate change, or for example, something pretty important that the youth are participating in the decision-making process at international level. For example, in the international forums of climate change. For example, on December of the last year was the COP25, that is the United Nations Convention of Climate Change, where all the countries that signed in the Paris Convention, and they are working to act for climate. So all the countries that signed the Paris Convention are talking about how they are working, and if it's necessary to take more actions about that together to negotiate it, how to work together, and that's it. And it's pretty important that the youth are there, just observing like what changes this process or participating actually, and it's pretty important, and we have to keep fighting to be there. And yes, and we are saying all of these movements, and it's a pretty important to take these examples of youth. So if you are young people, or if you are if you are old people, I invite you to take action. And intergenerational participation is pretty important. It's a key to act. So I invite you to join to other young people in your country, in your community, and organize it, starting to take action. And we must to continue because we have the responsibility of our lives now and the lives of our future generations. If we want to live in a better world now and after, we must work together and organize it, thinking advantage of our energy, our fresh ideas, and include technology. For example, the youth has achieved participation in many strikes. I don't know if you are saying, for example, Greta Thunberg in this movement, Fridays for Future, for example. So it's just like some examples, and well, I invite you to keep taking action. So, Rocio, you can continue.
Thank you very much, Karen. I believe the youth, because the youth is the next generation, is an inspiration, because the youth not have a word. I believe it, and I believe too the projects about climate change that organizes from the youth and climate change. Thank you, Karen. So the next slide, I explain about the Matic app. The Matic is a social media app where you can share actions you are taking to contribute to the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. As you share your pictures and videos, Matic connects your Sustainable Development Goals action with the Earth Charter principles. Any individual, school, university, organization that is involved in the realization of the Sustainable Development Goals can make good use of mapping by using it as a platform to share your activities and learn from others. Next, I will present the video of how to use the mapping application. But the next, the question and response for the special guests and organizers. Karen?
Yeah, well, finally, first of all, thanks because you to all the participants because you are here after this whole time. And well, this section is about questions and answers. So you feel free, please, to write your questions in the chat, and we will answering your questions for that. So we have many questions actually already. So I'm gonna read it. I'm gonna read this question, and then Rocio or Paul, the Dr. Paul Darcy or the ambassadors or me can answer your questions. So I'm gonna start with the first one that is from Esmeralda Bautista, and she asked for the young leaders. We know the importance of the Earthquater and its awareness and activation of it, but why not work for its implementation from the first educational levels, and thus future generations they have more present to carry it out. It could be a good way to starting raising awareness in the community. Well, I would like to answer your question actually, because me as a young leader, I work with kids actually in a school, and yes, it's pretty important, and it's a key to raise awareness about sustainable development and climate change, for example, and the education is a key. And yes, actually, there are many people working at schools or high schools or universities, or I don't know, just facilitating workshops or dialogues like this, or many conferences to talk about how to work with Earthquater at schools, or how to get Earthquater in the educative program. So yeah, the implementation is working from educational levels. Yes, of course. I guess that obviously it's pretty important to start to work together to have the Earthquater, for example, like an official topic in whole schools in the country. Yeah, but I guess that it's pretty complicated. But yeah, there are many people who are working on that. Me, as an example, that I am working always with schools, implementing programs. Actually, I have been working last year with a school implementing a 6-month program about Earthquater, and it was pretty good. So yeah, there are many people working on that. The next question is from Diana Arias. to the Dr. Paul Darcy. Is known to have had the problem of invasive species that have threatened the country's endemic fauna. What steps have you taken in this regard? And after the fires that proceed? Dr. Darcy, can you please answer this question?
Okay, well, thank you for the question. As I heard, you were asking about invasive species, so exotic species coming in and their threat to the native wildlife. Was that right? Yeah. Well, that's how I heard the question. As I said, one of the steps that's been taken whenever we get a damaged environment, exotic species come in, weeds and colonizers come in. So it's not just a matter of rehabilitating a natural environment to protect the species. You also have to keep invasive species out. So there's already a campaign in New South Wales to not only protect the trees, but also to reduce predators. So rats and stoats, ground predators that come in and attack the birds and wildlife as well, and will steal the food from them. So it's a combination of preserving existing flora and fauna, but also replanting and keeping out species that attack the native plants and species. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Darcy. And actually, there are another question for you from Arias, who is asking where were all the animals relocated after the fire and their ability to adapt again in the new environment? Okay,
well, great question. Basically, because of a lack of transport infrastructure and because you don't want to disrupt the animals too much, they're kept as much as possible in their locality. So they're not being relocated to forests that have not been destroyed. They're being kept in the locality in protected areas, and those protected areas are basically until the forests grow back, they're having to put in food and water. So as much as possible, you keep the species near to where it was, even if it has been destroyed. It's very hard to relocate, and also it traumatizes the species as well. So it's a huge problem because having lost 30 to 40% in some cases of the habitat, there are these huge areas that are basically uninhabitable for the next couple of years. So we're having to put them in protected areas with human intervention, but in the localities largely.
Thank you, Dr. Darcy. In fact, you have many questions.
For Sharon.
This is from Sharon Uralde.
She's from Panama. She's from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs from Panama.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, the question is this. I would like to know which specific international assistance or cooperation assistance you received during bushfires event.
Okay, well, so what perhaps made the headlines and will be of interest to your audience was that firstly, there were wildlife rescue teams flying in. So we had firefighters flying in from New Zealand, Canada, the US, and a number of other locations. We also had wildlife rescue, so specialist veterinary teams that treated the animals would fly in, again, from a number of countries. There was also financial aid coming in to basically help fund these activities as well. So it was cooperation in terms of wildlife rescue, firefighting itself, and also financial assistance to help people. What will be interesting, though, I think for this audience, what I'm keen about is we don't want this to be a one-off. We have cooperation, we need to keep it going. And I know that in some cases, now some of those wildlife teams have gone back to New Zealand, to the US. They still keep in touch. And doing dialogues like this is so important that we should not let this be a one-off. International cooperation was easier than we thought, and it had major benefits to all parties.
Perfect. Well, I'm pretty happy that all your questions are pretty interesting, and all the answers from Dr. Darcy are pretty useful and interesting as well. The next one is from Diana Lopez, and she says, while taking corrective action after such catastrophe is known to generate excessive economic costs, in light of this, did the Australian government or other independent organizations generate or propose any economic strategy to manage state spending, including any equitable economic benefit to all affected sectors?
Okay, well, I think as Ambassador Aviles talked about, our forest fire recovery was rapidly overtaken by COVID-19, like in the rest of the world. So I just want to say two things there. As I've firstly said, COVID is horrible, it's awful, but it's not a danger to the entire species like climate change. So we should not lose perspective there. I am worried that we'll divert money for the economy and COVID-19 as we have to. We don't want climate change to go off the radar, to not be allowed for. We have to start budgeting large amounts of our budget for climate change adaptation and mitigation, and that's where young people like you, forums like this, need to keep pushing there. What's also been interesting though about COVID-19 for me is that we have many governments in the world that talk about keeping the budget. But when there was a crisis, they suddenly found money, and I think the cynic in me says, if we really had the political will for climate change, we'd find the money. So I think COVID-19 has taught us that communities and the world can come together, and governments can find the money when the community says this is important. So to me, that is one of the great lessons, that what we've seen, I think, is a change in the world, that we've seen our priorities, what really matters. We've seen the world under threat, and the world has come together, but also national governments and communities have also, we've seen a great deal of cooperation that wasn't there beforehand, wasn't there 2 to 3 months ago. So there's a real lesson there, and we need to push that with respect for COVID-19 and the immediate economic futures as well, but also to say, you know, we have the financial resources, if the political will is there, to also solve climate change. And as I said in an earlier slide, climate change mitigation is profitable. This is one of the biggest myths out that I'm constantly fighting and whenever I'm accused of being a greenie or a lefty, excuse me, that in fact it makes economic sense, as well as ecological sense, as well as humanitarian sense, as well as moral sense.
Thank you, Dr. Darcy. The next one is from Arias, who is asking, how were people affected for the high level of contamination? I just want to know if there are any secondary effects for being exposed to much time.
For the smoke, well, as Ambassador Aviles said, we know there's going to be problems, but we don't know it'll take long term. So anyone with a lung illness or even with a weak heart, if you've got smoke in your lungs, it's toxic. It's actually a poison. But many of those immediate effects, you're going to die or have an illness 1 year, 2 year, 3 years down the track. So it's very much like a lot of nuclear incidents, where the immediate effect is not as great as the long-term effect. So we really don't know. All we have is estimates that a significant part of our population were exposed to this highly toxic smoke day after day after day. There will be implications further down the track, particularly for the elderly, for the very young, and for those with lung problems.
Thank you. We have another from Raquel Pinheiro, and she says that, will it ever be possible to have Australia's flora and fauna the way it was before the bushfires, 2019 and 2020 crisis in the future, will it be possible to restore all or almost all of what has been lost?
Okay, well, that's the great question. That's the ultimate question, and there's no easy answer. So the first thing is, as I showed in the slides, forests in Australia is a dry continent. Forests are adapted to fire, but not on the concentration of them. So they will regenerate, but as the climate gets hotter and drier, they will not regenerate as well. And so I think it's come to, and the sheer scale of this is so massive that it will require human intervention, and that requires financial intervention. So if we're going to restore those forests, those millions and millions of hectares, there's going to have to be human replanting, not just natural restoration. That will also require massive amounts of resources in terms of protecting the forests from predators that attack the young trees. So that's going to require a massive amount of money. And as I just finished saying, this is probably not the best time to do it because we're going to have an economic downturn globally. And again, people are going to say, well, I want a job first, we'll save the environment second, as we always do. It's understandable. So to me, the key is to say, well, we can restore the environment and create jobs. The rural sector, as I said before, is often a big supporter of coal and natural gas because it's one of the few places they can get jobs. There are less and less jobs in agriculture now. Most jobs are in the cities. So restoring our natural environment may be a way of job creation in rural areas. So short answer, I do not think in our lifetimes it will be restored. It can, excuse me, without significant government intervention and financial intervention and human intervention, both in reducing carbon to lower the global temperature, but also in actively replanting and protecting natural environments.
Excellent question. Excellent answer. Well, the next one is for all of us. So if you want to add something, you can do it. And it's from Alexandra Lora. And she says, what will be the best line of action to find a balance between the SDGs, Earthquater, and the Latin American reality? And well, I'd like to answer a little bit first this question. And as a sustainable development educator, I can say that we have to act from our reality and from our necessities. For example, I cannot go to a school and go with the kids and starting to teach about sustainable development and how important it is to take action for climate without see first what is the needs for this community first, because we have to see first the necessities, that the social, economic, and environment context first of the community where we are working, and then from this things we will start to work. So we have the SDGs that are a specific objective to get or to achieve. And we have the 17 objectives to reach, and then we have the Earthquater, that it's a tool to achieve this objective, but seeing this needs of the communities where we are working. And so I guess that this is the balance between, there is no, for example, the SDGs, the Earthquater, and our reality are not like a separate thing. They are together, and we can work with these three things together. And actually, it's pretty necessary that we have to work with these three things together. So I don't know if Rocio or the ambassador or the Dr. Paul Darcy want to add something more to this question.
Hello. Yeah, I think in Latin America, we have a lot of things to do. We have one of the most important areas to protect in the world. We have forests, we have the Amazonas, we have in Panama, we have El Darién, El Tapón del Darién. We have Peru, Colombia, Venezuela, and even in Central America, we have a lot of forests to protect. By the way, we have to strengthen. We still have some challenges. We have to strengthen the public policies for protection of the environment and increase the educations about the protection of the air quality, the water quality, teach more in the schools about the recycle. There is a lot of initiative, which is very good in all the countries in Latin America, and especially you guys. And I congratulate and salute you guys for this initiative that you always, when you do your meetings, you're talking about this important things that we have. And it's a step by step. The generations can help to create a new environments where the people can understand that the important that it's to protect everything that it's in the air, because everybody have most to have in space in this planet, because we have only one planet right now. We have only one, and I congratulate you guys for this. But yes, definitely there's a lot of initiative in Latin America. We still have a way to work more in the public policies, especially, and because a lot of people, they wanted to do it, but sometimes they got stuck to try to do it something.
I am very according to Ambassador Marcelino, because it's very fundamental and important to protect the Earth planet, because the Earth planet is our house. And actually, Panama have a project about to protect the environment and the animals. For example, Panama have the national animal, the RP eagle. RP eagle is the national bird from is a national eagle. Sorry, eagle. These animals stay in the habitat from Panama and the territories from the Central America. And I believe to the sustainable development goals to implement in Panama. It is all right in these questions. So in actually to the United Nations implements to Panama the projects about to environment. So you can ask the Minister of Environment too in Panama about the projects about the seas, about the trees, and now about the animals and forests.
I can add something about Rocio said. Panama is working in the 1 million hectares to put trees in the whole country. Everybody knows that every time when the development comes, and it goes against the environment, and especially the forest, but we have to protect ourselves and we have to protect as a countries. So we sign is a public policy with the Minister of Environment, and it's called 1 million trees hectares. So every certain time of the year, all the institutions and the public and private sector, they get together, schools, NGOs, and different actors in Panama, they get together to plant trees. So they do, we want to plant 1 million trees and we have been working on that pretty hard. So that started a couple of years ago, and so we will continue. I'm pretty sure this year we're not going to be able to do it or in the same conditions than before. But yes, this is one of the public policies that we have in countries in Panama. 1 million streets in hectares.
Thank you, everyone, for your answers. I don't know if Dr. Darcy, if you want to add something, or if it's okay.
I don't want to say too much because I've had a few questions, but basically just agree with everything that's been said. And just to reiterate again, this exchange was not about me talking. It was about young people being in touch. And I would encourage all our young students today and you in touch with this, please do get in touch with keep in touch with the people at the Earth Charter. As I mentioned before about the whole idea about let's just forget about reducing CO2 emissions, let's actually get carbon reduction onto the agenda. We need things like the Earth Charter to say that. It needs to be in the public debate all the time. It needs to become the new normal. We're probably preaching to the converted here. We all agree with it, but we need to get that out there all the time, every week, that it just becomes normal. Because my experience is that when you talk about the things you've talked about in the Earth Charter, most people have no problem with them. They say that sounds perfectly reasonable. We've got to keep it in the public mind all the time. And the problem that NGOs and young people have is that you lack the funds, and you're building your careers and so on. It's very hard to keep that energy up. So we need, as Marcelino just talked about, you need governments like the Panamanian government, which is incredibly progressive in environmental issues. You need government to link up with youth, and you need to pressure government and also just get this in the public eye all the time, because what you're asking for is totally reasonable. The Earth Charter makes total sense, and it's vital.
Thank you, Dr. Darcy. And now we have the last one, the last question, and it's from Sergis Rodval. And the last one question says, my question is, what can we do as young people to transmit to other young people the awareness of caring for the environment so as not to impact climate change? Question is for Dr. Darcy.
Well, I think I'm probably the wrong person to answer that because I'm not young, but I think I would actually, I appreciate the question, but I think there are people better equipped to answer that than me. And if I could hand over to defer to my other colleagues speaking on that.
Perfect. Yeah, I guess that it's a great question because, and I love it actually, because it talks about young people, and well, I am part of this population of young people, and I guess that we have the energy and we have fresh ideas to act. So we have the responsibility to take action actually and reach the awareness about the impact of climate change, to don't suffer in a future, or to don't make suffer our future generation later. So it was the last question. So I would like to thank to you all to be here, and just before to finish this dialogue, I would like to add something that is actually related with young people. The last one question, and we could see many options or many examples about how to work from the Earthquater and how to work as a young people. But we can create more examples. We can create more actions together and organize it. So the main the main thing that I would like to add is, for example, if you don't know how to start, you can participate with us as Earthquater young leaders, for example, and you can take these courses from the Earthquater, and you can join us as a young leader, and you can start to work with us actually. So if you want more information, you can go to the Earthquater website and you can find more information about that. But if you want more information, like right now, you can write to Rocio or me by email, and we can answer your questions about how to be a young leader of Earthquater. So thanks for all. Thanks for being here. And please, Rocio, you are in charge of the farewell of this presentation and this virtual dialogue. Thanks to Dr. Darcy and the Ambassador Marcelino for being here, and to because your attendance was very useful and very appreciated. Please, Rocio, the farewell.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you very much, dear participants, for having attended the virtual dialogue. Earthquater and climate change: the planet in flames are organized from Earthquater young leaders in commemoration for the 20th anniversary Earthquater Earth Day and in memory of victims and animals that died in the bushfires in the Commonwealth of Australia. Good night from the Republic of Panama, and see you soon. Thank you very much, everybody.
Bye. Good night.
Bye.
Thank you so much.